but it goes back to like, how are you measuring success? Like, is it title? Is it status? Is that what you want?
Yeah.
You know, I think for some people, it's like, no, I want to be doctor. I want to be lawyer. I want to be this. I want to be that. So is it money? Is it a way of life? Or is it the status that you want? And I think we're told it's status, but status brings money. And that's not true.
Welcome to Rebuilding the Village, a podcast that seeks to explore the causes of modern problems by examining the roots of our metaphorical village through the systems and structures in society that may have been disrupted in the technological and industrial era that we inhabit. Thank you for joining me today.
If you look at a lot of the statistics of what's going on today in terms of divorce, in terms of dating, in terms of like family quality and whatnot across the board, it's all kind of going downhill. But everyone has different reasons as to why. But I don't think it's any one specific reaon. And it's difficult to get people to basically pin, because if you ask anybody, it's like, what's happening? Oh, you know, Biden. Oh, you know, it's Trump. Oh, it's everything's too expensive. Well, kids these days are just too lazy. And it's like, maybe it's a little bit of everything, but there's a number of things that are interlocking in weird ways that nobody can really point to. And I'm at a point where I kind of sat down and realized, like, okay, I finally have a good sense of what I want for my life. I feel like it took a little bit longer than it should have to realize what I wanted for my life. But then when I started asking around and talking to the people, you realize like a lot of people are in the same category.
Yeah, I don't think there's a timeline. I think we're told that there's a timeline, but I think the reality is that there is no actual timeline of when you're supposed to kind of get your life together, and if that's even possible.
But I think I suspect that you're going to start seeing, we are going to seeing, why do I have like 16 goats? So right now you're actually on my TV. So I'm staring at I had to restart my computer because I couldn't think out why the sound wasn't working. And it turns out it was literally muted. That's what it was. That the whole idea being that like there were likely a lot of systems and structures and customs and traditions and whatnot that were in society in certain functions that we didn't even know what they were or why they existed.
Sure.
That now that we're kind of changing things rapidly, things are starting to break in weird ways, and we don't fully understand why.
Okay.
And a good example would be something like pop psychology. So talk to me. What is pop psychology?
Are you putting this out in the ethers? Like, should I introduce myself?
If you'd like to.
Sure. So
today's guest is
oh god, that sounds gross. Yeah, so you know, my name's Stephanie.
What I'll probably do is I'll put a little intro clip before to say I'm talking today with Stephanie Marsh-Campbell. She's a therapist who's been working for X amount of years, and today's topic is X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, so it's so interesting you're talking about family dynamics, because I've been teaching introduction to family systems at the college level for on and off for the last, let's say, 6 years.
Okay.
And I have a lot of obviously experience with kids. I worked with teenagers up to a time. I now have my own practice, but because of the restrictions of like it's all virtual. So with the restrictions of just virtual therapy or teletherapy, I don't see anyone under 18 anymore. It's just a little bit too complicated for me, and I don't particularly like it. So yeah, pop psychology. That is interesting. So you sent me a message last night.
And I kind of wanted to retract it a little bit. Yeah.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, go for it.
A little bit being that I suspect, and I could be wrong, that we're getting to a point in society where it's becoming easier and easier to offload the burden of trying to adopt responsibility in favor of putting blame on things that may be out of your control. So, for example, when a person basically says, like, it's not my fault I can't focus, I just have ADD. And it's like, well, maybe you do, but also you should be trying to think about ways to train yourself to like develop, like if you can, and not everybody can. There's going to be ranges of people's ability to focus and be disciplined in
Yeah.
certain capacities. But when you basically say like, I just can't get anything done, it's just my ADD versus like, or maybe you need to just turn off your phone and go for a walk and then just practice these routines. But people nowadays, I
Yeah.
wonder if people are exaggerating the usage of that. Oh, that's why I said it's almost like a crutch where people are basically saying
Yeah.
like, I could be doing something about it myself. Like there's a portion of it where maybe some people, it is so severe that you do need medication. There are people out there, but I wonder to what degree there's people that are just like, well, no, nobody actually sat you down and said, here's how to focus, here's how to structure your day, here's how to stay disciplined, here's how to like try to start practicing this routine of how to start taking control of your focus and letting your focus be in different directions. But at the same time, I do recognize the fact that we're living in a day and age where our attention is basically being like fought for in every
Oh,
possible different
absolutely.
direction in ways
Right.
that we've never had to do in all of human history. And it's having
Hmm.
weird consequences, which is kind of what's screwing up the village dynamics.
Yeah.
Sure.
So before I dive into this, I do kind of want to put a disclaimer. Everything that I talk about is not a reflection as a mental health community as a whole.
Mhm.
I feel very strongly about that. What I
Mhm.
talk about is strictly from my perspective and my views on things, and I do try to have as much evidence-based research as possible. But still, at the end of the day, I'm a Hispanic woman working in upstate New York, and so my experience is going to be very different, right? So just that disclaimer. Everything I talk about is not a reflection of the mental health community as a whole. It's just kind of what I see. So I think a big part of this, I'm going to call it self-diagnosing. So first of all, I think there is a huge, and it's because of social media. I think that there is this huge wave of people now self-diagnosing. I see it in my clients. I see it. A lot of other practitioners have, when we do peer supervision. I see that happening. And what we're seeing when some of the things that we are experiencing is our clients coming up to us and say, "Hey, do I have this? Because I saw this thing on social media, and of the 5 or 6 things this person talked about, I do 4 or 5, so I must have this thing." And I think it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I love that we are normalizing a lot of what used to be taboo, like ADHD, whether it's attention deficit or hyperactivity, the autism spectrum. I do love that we are normalizing it a lot. We're trying to see it in the community a little bit more, but also there is a shit ton of misinformation out there. And where does that line get drawn, right? Where does that line happen? And what are you doing about the information? So I tell my clients, like, you could label yourself anything you want, but what are you going to do with it? How is it an identity crisis? Is it like, I've always felt like there was something wrong, or I've always felt off, or I always felt like I wasn't part of the group, and this explains why? It's like, okay, well, that makes sense. Is it helping you in your identity to maneuver society, to maneuver social groups, to maneuver your life? Or is it causing you more stress to think about, oh my gosh, I could potentially have ADHD? Because if that's the case, then we don't need that either. Like, if we're going to use it, let's use it to benefit us, not necessarily to deter us.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's the bigger point, I think, is like, I don't know any other country to my knowledge that allows such a widespread of information to the general public. And it was like a good example is like, I don't think you see any kind of, I think in Europe, drug commercials are illegal.
Oh yeah,
Advertising for
right.
drugs is illegal. But then it begs the question, like, okay, over here, this is where I mentioned the pharmaceutical thing, which I said like they're kind of capitalizing on a self-diagnosing process. And there might be people on the way who are incentivized to just start throwing out pills and medication. Like, for example, I think recently there was a scandal or lawsuit with Purdue over it was I think it was like Vicodin or Percocet, something like that.
Ooh,
Where
probably. Yeah, there's
internal
a whole opioid
documentation was
crisis
leaked, and they
happening.
basically, what was that?
There's a whole opioid crisis going on. Yeah.
Yeah, there was
For
internal
sure.
documents that were leaked that basically said like our intention was to get people addicted.
Oh,
We knew what we were
absolutely.
doing. And then the question, all
Absolutely.
right, is there like an extension of that into other fields like psychological, psychotropic drugs and things
So
like that,
yeah,
potentially?
so the answer, I guess, the broad answer is yes. Also, I don't know if this is a good disclaimer or not. Some people are black and white thinking, and I am very gray. I'm very gray. I live and breathe and swim in gray. So it's irritating sometimes because I can't quite pick a side, and I'll say like, well, I can make a point for both sides.
Yeah.
We see evidence of that. And so one of the examples I want to point out is during the pandemic, especially during the pandemic. And yes, the pandemic in and of itself has thrown mental health for a curveball, like the whole diagnosing depression, anxiety, absolutely. However, during COVID, when people were forced to stay inside and they are recognizing I don't have a lot of the stimuli that I normally have, or for XYZ other reasons, there was an increase of ADHD medication, and it was there was a shortage, essentially, whether it was because of production or because there were a lot more people trying to fill this prescription of Adderall. And so there was a shortage of Adderall, and individuals who really needed Adderall couldn't get it anymore. And there were many, many, many people that were flocking to psychiatrists to say, I think I have ADHD, I need Adderall.
Yeah.
So that was a real problem. I don't know. I don't have any clients currently with ADHD, so I don't know what it's like to get that script filled anymore. I don't think it's quite a problem, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I wonder about like in that case, it's kind of like when COVID happened, it was like someone slammed on the brakes of society so freaking hard that they like almost like it was like a bit of a whiplash where you're so used to going 100 miles an hour, suddenly you have to just go to zero, but your urge to do things is so hyped up that you feel like, oh, and that's why I wonder, or maybe like if people with ADD, ADHD, and here's a good example. I've had a few patients of mine through massage practice where I had one person who came in who had like claimed to have a 3-year-old with ADHD. And
Oh, wow.
my initial thought was like, oh, I have a 3-year-old son with ADHD. And my initial thought was like, or maybe you just have a 3-year-old son. And maybe that's just what they do at that age. They're just out of their mind, a little bit
Yeah.
psychotic. But there was like this kind of confidence in the way it was talked about. Like, oh, definitely has ADHD, ADD. Like my sister, she was diagnosed ADD when she was 3 years old within 5 minutes of meeting the doctor. This is actually a
Okay.
story my mother told me multiple times of how she was prescribed Ritalin, and she was at the
At
pharmacy,
3?
had the script in her hand at 3. Yeah, 3 years old,
Man, that's crazy.
and had prescribed Ritalin at the pharmacy. Felt so horrible and guilty, she ended up walking away. And then for years said, "I wish I had filled this prescription," because she was so crazy out of the place. And she was like a bit of a psycho child at times. But I
Yeah.
really don't. I don't think it was like, oh, she has ADD, ADHD. I think it was more like she just has a personality that benefits better from learning more hands-on. She's the kid who needs to run and scrape her knees to learn to not run with your shoes untied, or like just go out and try things until she kind of gets it. But
Well, maybe that's so. Okay, so this is my gray, right? So I'm like, so
yeah,
maybe that is ADD, but it's not about finding a medication for it, but a whole way of reacclimating to your child and how to create a situation. Like if you do have a kid who is a little bit more hyperactive, like, I have 2 kids, right? And Teddy is a homebody. He's kind of like me. Like, I don't know if this makes me a bad parent. Whatever, it's fine. But he could easily sit in front of the TV for 3 hours and be satisfied. He's like, this is great. I'm wonderful. And he's not zombied out. He's thoroughly enjoying it, and he's retaining everything because he can recite anything to you of whatever he's just watched, right? And we try to make it somewhat educational, PBS Kids and stuff like that. So, but he's perfectly content. Like I can just sit down and I can just watch TV. Benjamin cannot. He can do that for about 45 minutes, an hour, which also is a blessing in and of itself. But after a while, he's like, okay, I'm bored. I need to do something. And he loves to build things. So with 2 parents working from home, it would be easier, in quotations, to have the kid that watches TV all day. Because then we don't need to worry. We can get our work done and interact with him when we have free time. Benjamin, in other circumstances, could be, I'm not saying that we do, but in other circumstances could be labeled as the issue child, because it's, I need to come up with things to stimulate him, to keep him preoccupied while I work from home. So it's just a matter of like, yeah, you know, in your example, is it still, yes, it could still be ADHD, it still could be ADD, but it's not necessarily a push for medication, which I do think, especially back in the day, there was a big push for medication. That is what I mean. The whole medical model is fucked, especially when it comes to mental health. So let's just start there. It's fucked.
Listen, you said
How
it,
we
not
treat
me.
mental health, huh?
You said it, not me, but I agree. Yes.
It's fucked. First of all, from a practitioner's point of view, it's really hard because everything that we have to fill out is from a medical model, and a mental health is not a medical model. But because it's kind of under the umbrella of that, everything, I'm sure you have some similar, like you have CAQH, right? Do you have CAQH?
What is CAQH?
Okay, if you don't know what it is, you don't know what it is. It's fine. It's a database that like mental health counselors have to put our information to make sure that we're up to standards
Oh,
with our
interesting.
like insurance policies, blah blah blah. It's for insurance paneling. For insurances, it's a database for insurances to come see, and if we want to be in network with them,
Gotcha.
it's kind of that. When you fill out CAQH, it's a medical model, and it's the wording that they use is really not meant for mental health counselors or social workers, but we push through. Okay, so anyways, that was just a roundabout way of saying we treat mental health like a medical model. So there's a problem, there's a pill, right? And now there is a push a little bit more. There are a lot more apps out there. I think that's a really good, if we're talking about pop psychology, that's a good measure of awareness. How many apps are out there now that's like journaling and scheduling and helping you keep things in certain orders to help if you have ADD or you have ADHD. Oh shoot, where was I going with this? Yes, I think what I was getting at is, yes, back in the day, I could see it, you know, not that I'm disputing your narrative, but 100%, there was, oh God, how much trouble am I going to get? You know, was it a white man doctor that's like, yeah, here's a pill, you know, like here's a pill, give it to your daughter, she'll calm down. Instead of a family therapist or a social worker to say, yes, your daughter is very hyperactive, you as parents don't seem to have a lot of energy, here are some other things you could try. You know,
Yeah. I wonder. This is a kind of a structure of society kind of thing. Like
yeah,
this point of saying like maybe this was one of those things that may have been an underlying issue that was kind of there in certain ways, that the structure of the way we did things in the world was kind of keeping it under control in a productive way, just by accident through the way society ran. Like a perfect example of this would be like kids playing outside in the neighborhood. You might say like, oh, they have ADD. No, they're just kids being kids. Like that's what kids do, and they've done for the past like 10,000 years. They go outside, they play with the neighbors' kids, they get all that energy out. They're playing, they're exploring, they're interacting, they're learning, they're socializing, and when they come home, they're exhausted. Cool. That was rinse and repeat for like 10 years until they're an adult, and then come from that. But now a lot of kids, like the traditional school structure model, has them just sitting in a classroom staring forward for 8 hours a day in a rhythmic manner, and you got a lot of kids who just can't do that. But the question is like, is it that they can't do that, or is it they were never really designed biologically to do that in the first place, and now we're trying to medicate kids into this model? And then question, I guess, being, is there a way to like channel the energy productively rather than try to force fit the kid to the environment he or she was never designed to
so
work
that's
with?
already happening. So you're absolutely right. Gosh, again, how much trouble am I going to get in?
I'm totally okay if this is
capitalism. The answer
if
is
this is a
capitalism.
provocative podcast, like the whole, not only this episode, every episode is provocative, and I get more focus because of this, but it's better for me anyway.
It's the
But this is the kind
man.
of conversations we should be having anyway.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I agree. So in terms of, oh gosh, I'm just wondering how far can I get into this, right? So I have so many opinions. So if we talk about education, right? If we're talking about education and children in school, I forget the verbiage, but it's like, it's a Socrates way of learning. You have a teacher and
Method, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So you have the teacher and then you have the student, right? Again, it's a very individualized model created for a very specific kind of person. And now we take this model, and which is essentially the basis of a lot of our education in the United States. It's, you have a teacher that teaches students. We don't, if you really kind of look at the method of teaching, is we don't really know why we teach the way we do. I mean, we do now. We don't really know, for a while we didn't know why we taught the way we did. We just know that this is how you teach.
I can give a suspicion about this. Like,
Okay,
when you
go
say
ahead.
the way we teach, what's the way? What are you referring to?
Oh my gosh, can you pronounce it for me? The Socratean way?
Socratic method.
Thank you. Socratean.
Well, that
Yes.
in itself was a good way, because it's almost like Inception. It almost like kind of plants the idea in your head, and you kind of generate and germinate the idea around it by drawing the connections in the way that makes sense for you.
Correct.
But
But think about that method, though. It's, first of all, really one-on-one, and you get to choose your apprentice. And now we're taking that method and we're like, all of the children, we have to teach all of the children, and we have one way. And all of the children have to learn in this method. So to go, it's just an example of like, no, you're absolutely right. As a society, we have done a disservice for the longest time. And we still have parents that are like, well, I used to get hit with rulers if we, that's called trauma, that's called abuse. We're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to hit children at school. That's a thing.
Within reason, though. I would say, I don't think it, like, trauma, abuse being the threshold of, like, I don't know how the problem is you can't draw the line of the threshold. Because I have friends, got male friends of mine who they are full grown, my age, and we talked about this. And he said, like, when I was growing up, like, I was a difficult child. My dad would like beat the crap out of me. Back, like, I needed every ass whooping. I needed it because I was like, I'm not saying this is a broad thing, but I think like a good example would be like me and my sister, where it's like, me personally, I'm more agreeable of a person. I don't like conflict. So when I started to do something wrong, my parents were like, hey, and I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, please, mercy.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think my sister Jackie needed to get an ass whooping, but maybe she did occasionally, but her learning method and her style was more, this is not exactly on the same topic, but hers was more like, she was probably better reward based rather than discipline based.
Well, that's often across the spectrum. Like, that's evidence-based. Positive reinforcement, not positive
depending
punishment.
on how the person reacts one versus the other better. It's like, I was terrified of punishment, but some people I just want the reward. If you can figure out what it was better. I don't agree. I think there's maybe this perception of, when I say like physical discipline, and people think they're just beating the crap out. No, I mean like a slap on the wrist, something to kind of like wake you up. But then the question was like, well, there's probably these extreme circumstances where they were literally pulling him to the side, out of them, versus like upside the head. It's going to sting a little bit, nothing crazy. Where do you draw the line, and how do you enforce it? That's the hard thing to figure.
Well, maybe that's another topic for another day. We'll put a pin on that. But talking about, I guess, back in the day, there was physical discipline for having to fit this method of education. And believe it or not, even though this is a very male-dominated society, within the United States, the education model fits better to women than men.
Yeah,
so oftentimes, boys were the ones who were diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, or behavioral issues.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? What is that looking at? What is that telling us? Now we are recognizing there's a lot more research being done on why we learn, how we learn, methods that we're learning. And now, I know charter schools, a lot of people have bad taste in their mouths about charter schools. But there are some charter schools that are taking that into account. Their lessons are no longer than 20 or 30 minutes, because the research has shown that that's as much information as any child can retain. There is structured activities. There's time for, even if it's just going from one class to another, there are sensory rooms. There are, okay, so you learn this thing, and now you're going to do this activity. And it is play, but it's play in association with what is happening in the classroom.
Yeah.
Right. We're not gonna play tag. We're gonna play let's break up like cell division. Like it's still tag. It's still running around in the gym.
Yes. Yes.
We're learning about cell division in groups. Great. Sounds good. There, here in Oswego, where my tiny little town where I live,
Mhm.
we did have something called the Buck School years ago. And there's a lot of drama about the Buck School that that's all hearsay, so I'm not necessarily going to get into it. But what the research has shown with the Buck School, it was a program that was only active for very short amount of time, 2-3 years, let's say. I don't know, maybe it was that. So the Buck School was essentially the school district took a building, and all of the children in the district that were underperforming or children at risk of like not succeeding, they put in the Buck School, and they did alternative methods of teaching completely. And you could put your kid in the Buck School. It wasn't like you had to, or it was just an opportunity. Like, hey, do you want to try something new? We're doing this. It's brand new. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. And this happened during my internship at college. And I had friends who interned at the Buck School, and they were saying like, it's so weird compared to how we're normally taught, and what our experience was, because there are very few rules in the Buck School. So I don't know exactly what the rules were. Obviously, the obvious ones for sure. But one of my cohort members at the time had said they essentially can go down to guidance, the school counselor's room at any time, at the mental health room at any time. They didn't, and there was no reprimand for it. There was no, you're getting in trouble, you're missing out assignments, blah, blah, blah. There were ample times to do assignments. They were given a lot of freedom, a lot of privileges. Their test scores did so amazing.
Mm.
These kids who couldn't learn in a very traditional environment was now given the opportunity, in a traditional environment, we're now given the opportunity in a very non-traditional environment to try to succeed, to still do the work, but do it in a capacity that they can understand. Maybe it's something as simple as you're doing work on a tablet. Maybe it's something simple as you're not using a piece of paper and a pencil. You're drawing on chalk outside. Like, you're doing giant math equations in the back. There was just a lot of different methods.
Mm-hmm.
More tactile, more walking around, more sitting on yoga balls kind of thing.
Yep.
And they obviously gave some type of standardized tests before, some standardized tests after. These kids ended up ranking in the district as some of the highest scoring on Regencies and other standardized testing. It ended because of funding.
Mm.
And that's, how true is that? How true is that? That's the drama. Like, I don't know. I can't say. That's all hearsay. I've heard different things from the community throughout my years of like, oh, this is why it ended. This is why it ended. It was politics. It was this and that. But
yeah,
there was evidence to show that the kids did amazing. Like,
yeah. I don't doubt that for a second. I think it's a lot of, I'm not a child psychologist over here. I mean,
neither am I.
But the family structures and whatnot. But a big one was just talking about that. It's almost comical how many of these kids that when they get the opportunity to learn the way that they can kind of learn, and I think most kids, like you said, most people learn through tactile stimulation along with things. And I think the traditional school model, from what I understand, was designed back in like the 1920s or 30s, I think it was, as a system with which to produce factory workers to, I don't know if you've heard this before.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. Like the school bell, the changing of the classes was supposed to reminisce of the shift bell.
The shift changing or lunch hour or whatever.
And everyone was basically just designed to just follow rules, because it was just meant to, and that's not, it's not terrible, because there are some people I think that you're going to see that are just like destined for basic blue collar jobs. And there's nothing wrong with that, because like the world needs that. But it's interesting in that capacity that like you it's hard. How do you go about sorting out the kids that are genuinely gifted and could thrive and do well from the kids who maybe you're just like, listen, you might do something like construction, a little bit simple, but you're good with your hand. I have friends who do like, I have a friend of mine who does construction. I think you know him pretty well. That I remember talking to
I'm
him.
just kidding, don't.
And we were talking about this, and he was like, at some point he was reminiscing and almost like beating himself up. Like, I could have done better in school. Could have done better in school. And I was like, you're crushing life right now, though. Even though like you're not
So
a physicist or a mathematician, but you're doing well in a field of work that the world needs. But there's also this nonsensical stigma around that type of work. And even in the case of school, it's like, you have to go to school, and if you don't get all straight A's, you're not going to succeed in life, and your life is going to be terrible. Like, or
think
you're going to go
about,
into a trade, and the world's going to love them for it.
Yeah, think about, I remember when I was in high school, BOCES kids were seen as like the dumb kids.
Oh yeah,
right?
you were a BOCE. Yeah.
You were a BOCES. First of all, you
Yeah.
were a BOCES kid. Like that was right, exactly. That was the title that you were given. And
Yeah.
I remember being very young, like being a freshman, and like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, what the fuck do I know? I'm 14 years old. And I just see the idea that like, oh, these kids are getting non-traditional, they're learning non-traditional things. Like they go to school, they still have to go to school halfway through the day or earlier in the day. They go learn, these trades, and then they come back, right? And I remember thinking, that's cool, I want to do that. And my parents were appalled, like, no.
Yeah.
You are not a BOCES kid. Like, that is not okay. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'm learning societal structures from my parents. Great. Okay. So I'm the AP kid. Like, you have to take AP classes. You have to do well in these things. Okay. That's the way to success. What is success? Is it title? Is it like, I have a friend who works in construction. He has a GED. He's going to make more money than I'm ever going to make in my life.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
He has I have almost 3 degrees. I am just a few credits shy of a 3rd degree. He's going to make, and I have students up my ass, and he is like, I have no debt because I did not go to college, and and I have an annuity, and I have retirement, and I have like a 401k, and I have investments, and I have a portfolio because I'm part of this union, and they give you all of these things. And I'm like, who the fuck lied to me? Who fucking lied to me? Because they told me that was the dumb kids, and now all of the dumb kids, again, quote, right? I don't actually believe these are dumb kids. They're doing, so what is it? What is it? Is it monetary? Like, is it, I'm very fortunate my husband also has a master's degree. I have a master's degree. We do make a good living. I think combined our salary is what this one guy makes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, but it goes back to like, how are you measuring success? Like, is it title? Is it status? Is that what you want? I think for some people, it's like, no, I want to be doctor. I want to be lawyer. I want to be this. I want to be that. It's like a person who starts off at a law firm is not making a lot of money. Like you're not, so is it money? Is it a way of life, or is it the status that you want? And I think we're told it's status, but status brings money, and that's not true.
So this is a really good book. It's called Troubled by a guy named Rob Henderson. He was, I forget his ethnicities. I think he's like, I want to say he's like Mexican, Asian or something like that. He basically was put into the foster care system when he was like 3 or 4 years old. And he went through the story. To the book talks about his life from like basically 3 to like 17, 18 years old, and it was complete chaos. And he basically managed to survive the foster care system. And when he graduated, he went to the military. Military gave him discipline, structure, really turned his life around, really showed him what he was capable of doing. And a big one for him was like realizing like, holy crap, I didn't realize I was as smart as I actually am, because I never got the opportunity. Discipline and structure my life so that I can bring the best up. Even for me, I had the same thing. Whereas I was like a C/B student in early college, and at the end when I was like, I just been taking it seriously, A's across the board. I was like, why did anybody tell me sooner? Oh my god, I could have been doing so good. This is ridiculous. But he coined this term called luxury beliefs, and the idea essentially is that people at the quote unquote like higher end of society will do what they
middle
can
to upper middle class. Middle to upper middle class, yeah, and
I'm talking like even higher than that, like the upper. Because he went to Yale on like a full scholarship. He studied psychology, and what he noticed was that basically a lot of these people, what they would do is they would attribute status to a belief. Because it used to be like your status was, how many cars do you have? How many homes you own, what's how big your report. But once people started to catch up on a general societal level of like, we're not too far behind anymore, it started to become like, well, what do you believe in? I believe in this, therefore I'm slightly better than you. And to the point that they're starting to then like kind of start to infringe and push on certain things as a form of status above you. Like, oh,
Yeah,
I believe
absolutely.
in, traditional marriage. And they'd be like, well, I don't believe in traditional marriage. It's stupid because it's outdated. I'm the better status person now for whatever reason. And in that capacity, the question of like, does status bring money? It's like, I think there's a whole argument that
I think what's
stat-
assumed. I think there's or back in the day there was an assumption that status from like not that if you had status you had money, but if you went to college and got a degree and became somebody, money would be there, and it's like that is a huge misconception.
well, this is interesting. I think 'cause it ties into some degree of I guess biology and like attraction between people. Is that like if you have some degree of perceived status compared to somebody else, you might be perceived as more attractive and have more optionality
It's the
among the people
opposite.
around you.
It's
Ooh,
so that's called the halo effect.
I've
Yes,
heard of
this
that.
is a
Explain it. If you can
this is a
explain it to that one more
sociological
time.
thing. Yes, absolutely. I love the halo effect. I don't. So the halo effect is the idea that we as a society, as humans, have a tendency of using attractiveness as a measure of oh shit, what's the word? Like better than. That came out very lame. So the idea that someone who is more attractive is better qualified, right? So if you have two people that have the same exact, resume, same exact experiences, blah, 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 this is a hypothetical. Us as humans will look at the person who is more attractive and say, no, that person is better qualified.
Mm.
And it's so ingrained in us that more attractive is better. It is more educated. It means more educated, more competent. That was the word I was looking for, competent. And it's true. The halo effect is a real thing. That someone who is more attractive will be deemed as more competent. So it's actually quite the opposite. That because we see things before we learn things, right? So it's not that if you are more there is that phenomenon too. People who are more successful are deemed also more attractive. Like people like the top 10 people of most attractive men always like include the president, even if they are not. Oh God. And so, but the halo effect is a real thing, and is a real thing in the working the workforce.
We're trying to, I guess this is one of those things that's trying to understand and destigmatize the role of people within society. Also, I guess figuring out like, I wonder like where the appreciation went for like the trades and whatnot in the past like 50 to 100 years or so. Like it's
Where
kind of
did
the lack of appreciation for the trades went to, because nowadays it's a major problem when you get a lot of people based like you said, it's like if you don't get all AP classes, you're not going to succeed in life. And it's like, well, again, what do you mean by success? How do you measure status?
Right? How do you measure success?
Yes.
Right. And so what's happening now is that there's a deficit in the trades. Like there are
Yeah.
no young people in trades. It's so interesting. We recently had some work done in the house. And what we are finding, again, upstate, I'm not going to say upstate New York, because if anyone from actual upstate New York hears this, they're going to have, a fucking connection. Here in central New York, my little town in central New York, we had some work done. And what we're noticing is that when you are looking for people to hire in trades, there's a huge age gap. They're either close to retirement, right? We're talking, 60, 70-year-old tradesmen, or they're 23 years old, which at our age now, I look at a 23-year-old, I'm like, you're a baby. What do you know? I have no trust in you. That's a me problem, not a them.
My house is gonna burn down if you even touch it.
I know, like what do you do? Your brain's not even fully developed. You're such a baby. No, it's they do great work.
Yeah.
But it is that idea that like there is a huge gap, because now there's a push for people going into trades, and so now we're seeing the trickle effect of that happening as of a few years ago. But now there's a big gap. There's a huge gap. There's no one kind of in our age. I say no one. These are broad strokes, right? There is a deficit of people in our age in trades, 30s, 40s. I don't want to say they don't exist. Obviously, they exist. But we were the generation that was told to go to college and do something. Like, don't be a tradesman. That's not okay.
Yeah.
Go be a professional. And meanwhile, again, my friend is making more money than I'll ever see in my life. God, and he's gonna be set for, you know what I mean? Like, he's gonna retire great.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I was so like, it was the question of like, where does that come from? Where does that stem from?
I guess the question of status and whatnot, and I guess this is a problem because this is kind of my concept of like what was the structure in the village that within the village it takes a village to raise a child, like that was keeping society kind of in a healthy way, technologically progressing towards the future. You know, like okay, technology is getting like across the board. Yeah, there's still a lot of crazy wars and conflicts and and problems in society, but generally speaking, there were more or less some systems that kind of there were systems in place that ensure the next generation of people coming through would kind of fill the gaps of the older generation leaving. And at some point, that system got completely disrupted. Now you got a 23-year-old and like a 55-year-old competing for the same job.
Right. Okay. So I kind of have a theory about that.
Mm-hmm.
This is not an original theory, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's capitalism. No, it's
you're not wrong. That's it. I can tell
no. I said that, and I'm like, actually, I don't think I'm wrong. So I think this goes back to the idea of, and it kind of ties back to the education system and socializing as young kids. We, as like America, the country, right? So remember, there's a lot of people who believe that the golden age of like American society was like right after World War II, right? And it's like there's so many problematic things with that. But okay, even if we go with that, right? Like we still see the remnants of that. We are still living in the remnants of that. The idea that this was the best that America was. This is like America full force. People had jobs, people had houses. This is great. Okay.
Yeah.
All of the terrible things aside, one of the things that really identifies an American, I'm quoting American as an American, is the individualism.
Yes.
We honor the individual. Right. We honor the individual. We back in the day, I mean, now Marvel is doing all sorts of things with like proof work, but superheroes, they were individuals with sidekicks. Right? We idealize the hero, the Superman, the person who could do everything, right?
It's funny, but it reminds me of like the Justice League, and it's like, yeah, Superman could do all your jobs by himself if he really wanted to.
If he really wants to, right? Right. And so, now it's a little bit different, but we're not going to see the results of now for another 30 years.
Yeah,
we are seeing the results of the way that life was from the 50s and 60s. Like that's the residual America that we're living in, right? And so it takes a while. So anyways, we as a society individualize the singular, the one, especially, the image is a man, like the one man, like you have to be attractive, you have to be this, you have to be that, you have to be the best one. Right. Yeah. Whereas in other societies, that is not a thing. That is seen as selfish, that is seen as terrible. One example, so you're talking about this village, this idea of it takes a village. And we say that here in America, but we don't mean it. We don't do anything to promote that.
That's what I'm hoping to do with this podcast. I'm hoping to promote the village.
Yeah. So one of the things I think, you had said something kind of I'm going to work backwards a little bit about, your sister and, oh my gosh, there's so many directions I want to go. So I'm just going to go on a little bit of a rant right now.
Sure, go for it.
In family therapy, there is the idea that if you have a problem child, that the family created that problem child, right? And so I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole other thing, right? So there's a book called The Family Crucible. It's a very outdated book. It's a little bit weird, but the gist of it is there. And I suggest anyone who is having family dynamic issues to read that book. It's a pretty easy read.
The Family Crucible?
The Family Crucible. The author of that book is one of the founders of like family therapy.
Gotcha.
As we know it today. So the idea is that the family is not equipped. The family is dysfunctional and has created a catalyst to put all of their problems into. And that often it's like they pick who the problem child is. And that's the problem child. Now, I'm not even going to pretend to like go through that because that's a whole other, I could teach 3 classes on the Family Crucible. So if we're going to kind of just take that, right? Take that idea and going back to this idea of a village, in American society, it's like, well, this is your problem. This is the problem of the sibling and the 2 parents. And that is your problem. And you can get meds for that and blah, blah, blah. Whereas in other countries, it is definitely more of a sense of community. And when I say that us as a society doesn't allow for that, there are very few places that we can exist without having to pay. Library and parks.
Mm.
And oftentimes, there are limitations on those. You know, with libraries, you can't bring food, you can't do this, you can't do that. You can only exist to read the books. Okay, no problem. And on parks, even architecturally, we're going to make these benches as uncomfortable as possible to keep people from staying here for too long.
Mm.
Right? Okay, well, that's shitty. Whereas in other countries, it is not uncommon to have parks that are created so elaborately that allows parents to have coffee and watch their children play and have affordable foods and things and socialize with each other as well as their children. Right. So we think about now the singular American home. It's like, you need this toy to keep your kid preoccupied. Like, I mean, you know, I'm a victim of it too. We're practically trying to build an oasis for our children so that they don't have to socialize outside. Pandemic has also, I mean, that's because my husband and I are a little bit antisocial, but it's fine. The pandemic has created that too. It's like, now I have to create an oasis for my child in my home. You need to get these Fisher Price toys. You need to get this. You need to get that. All of these things. Where it's like, these things exist in park.
Yeah.
Right. And in colder weather, a lot of these European parks have heat lamps or areas where you could warm up. Right. Or benches that are comfortable. And if there's just more of a sense that you can exist in places, there are like indoor markets that you don't have to pay to exist. You don't have to pay a product to stay. So many more activities to do for children that are free that kids can do, as opposed to here. If you want your kid to do something other than go to the playground, you have to pay money. Like, if I want him to go play soccer, I have to pay a fee. If I want him to play hockey, he has to, you know, all these fees. And so we as a society don't do a very good job.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of TikToks of women, specifically women, describing their transitioning from living in a European country to living in an American country versus, or living in America versus Americans that live here and then they go overseas. Which is like, oh my gosh, it's so much easier. It's so much easier to make friends. Kids are in the playground all hours of the night, you know, because European countries hold very different time standards than we do. You know, it's not uncommon to be able to buy a glass of wine in the park and sit with, this is what they do. They're like, there's a coffee shop. There's, you know, you can get a glass of wine for $1.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and you just sit down with your drink and you just like hang out with other parents, and you can even get food delivered like right there. And it's like the idea is also it's accessible. It's very inexpensive. This is not a gourmet meal you're getting, right? But it's still quality, and it's within these park systems so that it can be a lower price so that the parents can eat, the kids can eat. There's just a big, I mean, nothing gives more of a sense of community than sharing food, right? Than like breaking bread. And we are just not set up for that. We're like, no, we are so concerned with homeless people taking over everything when it's like, we don't want to give anything to anyone who doesn't deserve it.
So what's funny is that the last podcast I recorded yesterday was with a Slovenian woman, and I was trying to figure out what the topics to pull out was, and she just basically mentioned like, isn't it like something like with homeless people, they put like the spikes on the bench so they don't sleep there? And I was, that was kind of the topic we talked about initially. But the point you're getting at is a good point, is the fact that like you said, capitalism. I think when people say that, like, oh, capitalism is like, what? Are you a communist?
I mean,
I think there's a really good term I've heard before. It's referred to as limbic capitalism. It's one of several iterations of it, but I think there are limitations to what capitalism or an individualistic society should be enforcing, because you don't realize that you're pulling from the future to benefit today in ways that you don't see. And like limbic capitalism basically means it's like capitalism trying to target the back of your brain in ways that you don't see necessarily. A good example of that might be like pornography, where it's like traditionally speaking, throughout all of human history, the male sex drive more or less was designed to try to like ideally, not always perfectly, but ideally, men were like, what do you want me to do? Women were like, we want you to jump. And they'd be like, how high? I will figure out how to jump as high as you want me to, but convince you to like have babies with me. And that's kind of what propelled competition in society forward, is like, we want to be the best version. Okay.
Yeah. No.
Possibly, maybe not. But
No,
generally
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
And so then that energy
Evolution,
was like,
right? Yeah.
what was that?
Like evolution, almost. Like, so
And
the best ones, the more
ideally
attractive
that
ones.
like that libido was like, I just want to talk to girls and do things with them so bad. Like, well, what do they want? Generally speaking, educated, if you can, well-dressed, well-spoken, try to put yourself together like a functioning human being, so that if you're going to go up to her and say like, hey, what do you think? That you can say, okay, like, you seem like you put the work in. And the energy for that work maybe came from you going like, I just really want to talk to her and do things to her and all that fun stuff and have kids. But when you take that energy and you redirect it towards like, well, you could put yourself together, try to get educated, get a job, do something functional with society, build a community around you, or watch porn and masturbate. And your brain's going like, well, the first one is a lot of energy with not a guaranteed payout, whereas the second one is just like, nothing's stopping me. So you're kind of almost wasting that energy in a way. But the problem being that like it's kind of targeting your limbic system, which can have an override effect on your logical thinking.
Yeah.
And the point being, then, it's just like there's like things with like social media, or even like a lot of advertising nowadays, where it's like it's meant to make you feel like there's something wrong with me if I don't have this thing. Well, is it but it's because it's specifically targeting a part of your brain that can weed its way into your logical thinking, where you think, I made the decision to buy this. Like, you really didn't, though. Like, you think you did.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
But you really didn't.
And
this is where I say like capitalism should have some kind of limitations, where it's like you shouldn't be targeting parts of the brain that have like toxic effect. Because in the case of like pornography and things like that, you have a whole, like, the dating scene is collapsing right now. Like, nobody's it's falling apart. And it's like, well, why is that? Because young kids just don't have any interest and ambition. Like, no, it's because you indoctrinated them with like waves and waves of like pornography and video games and junk food and feeling like crap.
I have other theories as to why that and the ands, right? Because I don't think in black and white. I think you're right.
What is your gray theory?
My gray theory is okay. So this is talking about specifically not LGBTQ community. Okay, so we're going to put that aside for a second. I'm talking about cis-het couples, right? So cis hetero couples. One of the issues now, gosh, I wish I had my textbook on me because I forgot what it's called. But basically, gosh, I guess I'm just going to say it in a way that's going to piss a lot of people off. Basically, because women are becoming more equal and becoming the standards are getting higher for men.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they are not meeting those standards. It is no longer, you need to have a good job and you need to look good and you need to be educated. Now you need to have emotional intelligence. You need to be sensitive. You need to make sure that I am not the manager of the house, that is divided. I don't want weaponized incompetence, no gaslighting. And it's a different change. It's a shift because women now especially are like, I don't need you to pay my bills, so why am I going to settle for less? And they are recognizing they are much happier single.
I would contend on that point for like the long term, though. That's because I question, like, when you say like in your 20s and maybe late 20s, early 30s, I'm much happier being single. But this is where like the biological portion kind of steps in, where it's like, why is it so it's like, hypothetically, you're like a 30-year-old woman, and it's like one day you're like, I don't want kids, and one day you turn 30 and you're like, why are babies 10 times cuter than they were yesterday? What the fuck?
God, hormones.
And hormones, they start kicking in, and this is kind of one of these things where I think the largest growing number of people who are I have to see if I can find a study somewhere. Like, the largest percentage of people as part of the population that are taking antidepressants are single women over 40.
Interesting.
And the point being, like, this because I know we've
had
this.
Is it because they're taking care of themselves, or is it? No, I'm just kidding. Is it because
this kind of comes to this point of like
they're uppy?
Well, there's an interesting, there was a meta-analysis. It was like a 2010 meta-analysis I remember hearing from the podcast. And it was talking about how, like, across the board, and I'm not saying women should have kids, it's their job. It's like,
sure,
odds are majority of the population, you'd be happier with a family more than you realize. But because it's a hormonal thing that, like, generally speaking, so the 2010 study basically said, like, out of 100% of women that didn't have kids, 10% of them didn't have kids because they genuinely didn't want them.
Okay.
10% didn't have kids because they couldn't because of some kind of medical interference,
Sure.
unfortunately. 80% didn't have kids because they couldn't find the right guy and they were
Yeah.
focusing on other things, and they ended up like missing the window basically because their
Mhm.
fertility ran out. And that question is like, where the hell this happened really quickly. Like, and if you look back through time, again, maybe different societal structures, patriarchy, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
They're like, I have a friend of mine who's a fertility acupuncturist, and I've actually heard the conversations while they'll put the person on speakerphone. I'll just be like in the room listening. These women who are just basically saying like, I thought I had more time. I was told to focus on my career, and now I'm missing out. And I'm trying fertility interventions and things like that, but like it's not working, and I'm terrified I'm going to miss
I
out.
have another theory of that too. It's because our education system is meant for the timeline of a man, not a woman. But anyways, yes.
Yeah,
So
I
that
do
is
agree with that.
certainly, yeah, that is. I mean, if you're a woman and you want to be a doctor, you essentially have to be in school for your most fertile periods, right? Like,
Well, the tough part even there though is like you mentioned this earlier with the attraction thing, and that I think it's like another thing was talking about like the 70 to 80% of divorces nowadays are initiated by women, and
yeah,
more often than not, it's women with a higher earning potential or college education compared to their spouses.
interesting.
And so you say like she wants to be a doctor, not that we should, because there's a valid point to say that women are more intelligent on average. They have a higher capacity for higher intelligence, like than men are.
Yeah, I don't even like the way that's phrased, but
What's the
I
phrase?
hear what you're saying. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I hear what you're saying.
But the point being that if there's almost going to be this unintentional biological problem where you kind of say like, I busted my ass, I built my career, I don't need a man, but I kind of want a man, but I'm not attracted to a man who's lower status or lower income than me because of this built-in hypergamous nature. And it makes perfect sense as to why. Yeah. And it makes perfect sense because it's like, listen, if I'm going to burden the challenge of creating a human being in my body for 9 months and then have to feed and take care of it for 20 years, you better be a awesome dude.
You better be worth it.
You better be worth it. But then the problem then being that we have a large percentage of women who are going through like the education and whatnot, who are basically saying like, if a man is not at or above my level, I don't want to talk to him. But that pool of men is comparatively small, which is then causing a dating crisis, which is then probably leads to like a population collapse. And there's these weird interlinking things where we're kind of like, I've had this talk about this before. It's like one thing to really come back to is removing the demonization of motherhood. And not that you shouldn't encourage women into education, but how do you figure out how to harness female intelligence while simultaneously not breaking apart the structure that ensures that the next generation of kids coming through are functioning adults?
Yeah, I think capitalism.
Yeah, I agree. And
because
I think
in order to do that, you would have, I mean, let's just pick one method, right? Like, okay, so, gosh, there's so many issues. There's so many issues in this world. Let's just say, okay, so a woman wants to be a doctor, 12 years of school, right? 12 years of education outside of high school. You have 4 years of pre-med, 4 years of medical school, and 4 years of before you become an attending, right? And that's not even including if you want to be a specialty. So let's just say 12 years, right? Across the board. Right, and those are 12 of your most fertile years.
Yeah.
So let's just say the theys create some type of medical program where women can complete that in half the time. Okay? They probably could, to be honest.
I agree. Yeah. And I think
they probably could.
Current
but how are you going to monetize on that? How are you going to, that's 6 years of money you're missing out on. Why would you change that then?
I agree. And this is where
you can't condense. If it's going to cost, I'm going to just throw numbers. If it costs $100,000 to become a doctor, right? You're not going to condense that for 6 years. You're not going to be like, okay, instead of 12 years, you have to pay that in 6 years. Then again, that completely eliminates a good portion of individuals who would want to go through this because they can't afford it. Right. So you're already now creating barriers on barriers on barriers. And so realistically, that's not going to happen. To get the collegiate system to do any type of changes like that is so difficult and keeps money out of pockets, honestly, that's just never going to happen.
Yeah.
Which is super unfortunate.
The difficulty is in Like there's another guy. His name is he runs a company. It's like Ramsey Solutions. His name is Dave Ramsey. Have you heard of him before?
No.
He was like a financial coach guy who he basically built a business like teaching people how to manage money, how to get out of debt, like baby steps of how to like build a emergency fund, retirement fund, financial literacy, financial education. And he mentioned in one of his podcasts, like it's got like $100 million company, but it's all built around like effective financial proper literacy and interaction with money, and trying to teaching people how to like not go broke by the time you're 50, essentially, because it's a huge problem. But I remember him mentioning in one of his podcasts that when COVID hit, they basically said like they do a lot of live in-person big events where people come and ask questions and do all this stuff and try, and that stopped completely. And they took a massive hit as far as internal in terms of revenue and things like that. But he made a point to say like when that happened, we sat everybody down. We said, listen, we're not firing anybody. Yeah. The guys at the top are going to not take a paycheck because we're fine financially. And then if we burn through that, but he basically would make it like he'll make a point to say like capitalism is good, but you need to have some constraints somewhere because like he basically said like, because eventually we'll bounce back, but we could survive. We can take the hit. We're going to still keep paying you guys lower down. And then when things come back to normal, like if that burns out, then we have reserve money. And that burns out, we have it's like we're having multiple layers we're going to burn through before we may have to lay people off. But it's going to be a while. Yeah. And his point being like the bigger picture. Yeah, the bigger picture is like, yes, we're here. We want to make money. But at the same time, we also recognize if we have like 3 mansions and a boat, you guys are starting to pay the bills. Like, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot by firing you guys now. And then later on, when we need you back, you're not going to want to come back because we kind of kicked you in the face.
That's awareness, I guess. And maybe that's the thing. Not everybody has awareness. But there's something that I've learned is that not everyone has awareness.
Well, it's like future awareness and like long-term thinking. Right, and when people start to like chase every penny now, they don't realize they're indebting themselves later on.
They're shooting themselves in the foot. Right. I have a client who saw this example and is trying to implement it themselves in their work life. But essentially the example is contract negotiations about healthcare. And the idea is that in this work structure, you have admin and then you have workers, right? Workers and admin. Admin tends to get paid more, right? Like management admin tend to get paid more than workers, the people who are boots on the ground. And the idea was like, okay, well, if they have to provide health insurance, everybody pays $200 for your health insurance, a paycheck. And there are negotiations now that's like, wait a minute, hang on, because $200 out of someone's paycheck who's boots on the ground, who's making minimum wage, is very different than $200 when someone's making 6 digits. And so the negotiation now is, and a lot of companies are doing this now. Well, I shouldn't say companies, a lot of organizations are doing this now. I don't know that companies are doing it, but not-for-profit, some organizations are doing this, where how much you pay in insurance is a percentage based off of your salary. Because $200 is for you is probably equivalent to $20 for somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. And so, it's like, again, this idea of longevity. Like, yes, you are going to get more of a paycheck cut if you're admin, but you'll have people who stay longer. You're not having to slow down to rehire people, to reteach people, to onboard people every 6 months because they are unhappy. The idea is that you're creating longevity.
Yes. Yeah. And this is kind of like the village idea kind of ties into this question of like, are you shooting yourself in the foot on a societal level? Yeah. Like, this is like, are you shooting yourself? Like, we should have competition amongst companies to innovate and bring prices down on new products or whatnot. But at the same time, like if you have, in the context of like the village, society and whatnot, it's like when you're not investing into the next generation of kids, and you're wondering why these kids are coming to the workforce completely inadequate, not able to do basic tasks, you wonder like, well, these kids these days, like, well, who the hell raised them?
Yeah.
Like, where do you think this came from? It wasn't just out of a vacuum. And I get people talking to like with massage therapy. It's like kids are just lazy. They're this, they're that, and it's just like kids are what you make them to be. Most people, there's personality differences, and maybe some people are more hardworking than others, intrinsically competitive. But like at the same time, if you don't show them allow them to experiment with what they're capable of, they're never going to might not push themselves naturally. And then when they're incompetent later on.
Have you worked with Gen Z?
Haven't worked with them, but I've
Oh, I
heard
love
nothing but
them.
horror stories from a lot
No,
of my
I
mates.
love them. Oh my God. I think they're amazing. I think, oh my God.
Not
I have a
nothing.
lot of
That's
clients.
not true. Not nothing. But I've heard a lot of horror stories.
I'm sure
But it
you
depends
have.
on where you look.
Correct. One of the reasons why I love Gen Z, oh my God. Everyone is, so first of all, I don't think that one generation is better than the other. I think we're all a dumpster fire of human individuals that
Oh
grew up
yeah,
with
there's a lot
different.
of. That was one of the things of the podcast is that there's a lot of intergenerational conflict going on, and nobody wants to
Oh
sit down
yeah.
and say like, maybe we could have found something better, and also you could do something better. So let's sit down together and figure it out, rather than say, no, it's your fault. No, it's your fault.
It's so easy to point fingers.
We're the planet. It's like, well, there's a million different things going on.
So one of the things I love about Gen Z, and I have a few clients who are millennials and Gen X who are managers of Gen Z, and it's hit or miss, right? It's again, we're not gonna talk in absolutes, but one of the more common traits of Gen Z is not necessarily that they're lazy, but they are not going to go above and beyond. They are not staying late. They are like if you pay me for this is what I'm giving you, and I am giving you not a cent more.
Really?
And I respect that boundary. Absolutely. The idea, so the idea is that for the longest time we're taught you work at a job, right? You do well, like you have the expectations met, and you're supposed to go above and beyond, and then you'll become manager. Well, that's bullshit. Like, let's be fair, because if everyone goes above and beyond, like, not everyone can become a manager. So you've just wasted time, right? You've just wasted time. So Gen Z is like, no, if you pay me for this is what I will give you. And I will not do more unless you pay me more. And there are so many, this isn't just Gen Z now, this is like millennials too,
Yeah.
which I think is what a lot of older generations are saying, like, we're lazy, blah, 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 this and that. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are people who are lazy. But that is across all generations, okay? I have so many friends that are X and millennials that are like, I have no desire to be in management. I am going to go to work. I'm going to clock in, and I do not want to be in charge of people. I am happy with the mid salary I have. I am fine. I do not need to strive for more.
Yeah.
I have food on the table. My kids' education is paid for. There's clothes on their back. I'm done. Like, yeah, maybe I don't get to go on vacation here or there, like, but that's okay. I don't fucking need that, because I also don't want to be thinking about work outside of work. I want to be present with my children.
Yeah.
And like this idea that, like, you strive, you work to be the best, the superhero, right? The best one. And that's not happening anymore. And I think that's where a lot of management gets really upset, because they're like, you're not a team player. You're not showing. It's like, no, I'm not. You don't pay me to be a team player. You pay me minimum wage or the base salary that I need to survive. So I will give you the basic of what you as a company need to survive. This is an equal. And it's getting really hard for organizations to find work outside of that mentality, and it's pissing them off, because some millennials are also taking that, like, I'm like, yes, let's do this, I love it, I'm for it, because fuck capitalism. Do what you have to do, to an extent. Yes, to an extent. Do what you have to do. Again, I don't think in absolutes. Do what you have to do to keep yourself sane, to keep a proper work-life balance. But that wasn't the theme years ago. That is not what was celebrated years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Years ago, it was the hardworking person. It's, I mean, there are so many, oh my gosh, what's that one? Gosh, not All in the Family. I mean, there are so many sitcoms. When I teach family therapy, I actually, we watch sitcoms from, not Happy Days, shit, whatever. But you see this in sitcoms, and like sitcoms from the 80s, especially sitcoms from the 80s. What's the one with Winnie and fuck? Anyway,
it's gonna come
to me. It's the fuck, the fuck. It's like fuck sitcom. Anyway, so many TV shows. TV shows are really interesting because they are false, but also are a reflection of our society in any given moment, which is really interesting, right? So we can look at it as a study, but we can't use it as a prime example. But when I teach my class, we look at different TV shows as a reflective case study. And so the Wonder Years. There's this one episode of the Wonder Years where I showed in my class, but you see this across all sorts of types of sitcoms and TV shows where dad comes home from work and work is still with dad. And dad comes home from work and work is still with dad. And he has his, I mean, they have a briefcase. That means they're bringing things to and from work.
Yeah.
It's not a lunchbox. It is a briefcase, right?
Yeah.
They're bringing work home and they are bringing that back. And there is no divide. So the idea is that you work and you work and you work until you become a manager, because that means you've proven to the company that you are loyal, and then they will reward you. And now we're like, companies don't give a fuck about us. Like, we're aware there is no loyalty to your employees. You will replace me super fast.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to give you loyalty.
Yeah. I talked to a financial coach, and we were talking about the people's relationship with money in America, and how I think prior to like the 1950s or 60s, I think it was, like there was no such thing as a credit card. Or the 70s, I think it was. There was no, like, everyone just carried cash around. Maybe you had a checkbook, something like that.
There are no credit scores in Europe.
That's another thing. That's a cool thing.
There's no credit scores. When we had an au pair, stay with us. She was from Italy, and we were talking about credit cards, and she's like, okay, like, yeah, credit cards obviously are a thing. And we were talking about credit scores. She's like, I don't understand what a credit score is. I'm like, oh dear God, how do I explain this to you? Yeah, credit scores were not a thing, I think, until...
I don't know exactly when, but I'm sure you could look into it.
Not even credit cards, credit scores, specifically credit scores.
Yeah, and the point of being that, like, there really was no such thing as like a credit card, but then around the 70s, I think, is when credit cards kind of really popped into existence.
1989 is when credit scores came out.
No, so that's a birthday gift to me. Thank you for my credit
Happy
score.
birthday, you. And we can talk about the implications of credit scores. But anyways, I kind of want to go back. So we're talking about The Village, and we're talking about pop psychology. I don't know if you want to go back to that. We've derailed a little bit. It's totally up to you.
That's fine. We can go back to the point being with, like, it's getting to that point we're talking about with credit cards, is that it became this new culture of, that's part of the reason, like, why, like, the Mercedes 80s, where it's like the 80s and 90s were just like this booming, like, everyone just worked hard and we all made more money. It's like, really what you were doing though was just like cranking credit cards against the machine as hard as you could, borrowing against the future. And it became that this era of people where like, we just saw that when we worked hard, things got better. It's like, yeah, because you're post World War II, everything blew up.
Everything got better. Yeah.
Everything got better compared to what it was before.
What it was, right. We're not rationing sugar and eggs now.
Where the same amount of effort is not getting the same return anymore, and you're starting to squeeze every drop out of the limit that you possibly can, and wondering why it's not working. And then people are starting to now talk about and realize, like, you know what? Like, working the extra hours at work is not as worthwhile as me spending time with my kids.
Correct. Right.
Yeah, and like exactly. There has to be something of a balance, and this is where like the village thing kind of comes into play. I had this talk about how, like, I just thought, and I could be totally wrong, that I suspect in time we may see a shift back towards, quote unquote, I know you're going to hate to hear this, like somewhat traditional, I'd say, gender roles in the household, but more in the sense of, like, I don't think there's enough time in the day for two parents to have a hardcore career and also your kids.
No, there's not. There's not. Like, I don't think there's going to be a push for it, though.
But that's the unfortunate part, because this is where I say, like, this something's breaking, where like the kids are now paying for it. Because, like, I have a lot of kids, like, I have a lot of teachers I work with, and a lot across the board in different schools saying that these kids are out of their mind, they're so dysfunctional, they don't know how to behave. And then there's, like, looking into the research behind, you realize, like, well, there's a lot of research points into the fact that if you don't have, like, parents to some degree really involved when they're very little, 4 or 5 years old, someone comes around, they haven't still learned how to socialize, and they turn into monsters. And you wonder where it happened. Well, because both parents had to work just to survive. But who's paying the price of that? The kids, as a result. Because I'm not saying you should be a stay-at-home mom 24 hours a day, but it's like, there are things that you can't outsource as effectively as being with your kids, especially when they're really, really little. I'm
going to rephrase that, because I'm going to say, you're not entirely wrong, right? Like, correct. We live in a society where you have to have a two, like, back in the day, a one income household was enough. Now that's
Yeah.
not a thing. You have to have
Yeah.
a 2-income household. The thing with children
Unless you're a
is
construction
consistent.
worker, like
Unless
that
you're-
guy friend of yours.
Yeah, no. God. Fuck him. I love him so much.
I hope he watches this podcast.
I'm so jealous of him. No, it yes, you're not wrong, right? It's a failure to thrive. So you need consistency, you need nurturing for children. And yeah, that doesn't always, unfortunately, with a 2-income house system, there is a deficit. However, more could be done from society to help bridge that gap. And there's more than just,
I agree.
More than just like, well, we need to give all of the income to one adult and the other adult stays home. There are studies that show that stay-at-home moms, I mean, there's studies that could show anything really, like, but that stay-at-home, like, kids do benefit from stay-at-home moms, blah, 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 this and that. Great. Okay, that's fine. I think in other countries, early childhood care is free.
Yeah.
And not only is it free, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree to be in the classroom. And the classroom sizes are so small.
Yeah.
There's a lot of attention. It isn't just 20 kids in a room. This is like 5 or 6 kids per adult. And that person is paid a livable wage that they can survive on. It is
that was
great.
back in like the golden years of America, where like, middle class teacher was more than enough to support the family.
Yeah, that's not a thing anymore.
And it's not anymore. It's just getting worse and worse. But like when I say that, I mean, in the like, may not be gender roles, but it may be that like sooner or later you need to step up and start investing in the younger kids coming through, or else you're just going to have a complete dumpster fire later
We're
on.
just going to have a dumpster fire. We're just going to have a dumpster fire because the reality of the situation is, even my household, we cannot survive on my husband's income alone at this time. Like that's not a thing. I have to be working.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I didn't have to work, but I have to be working. So I see what you're saying in the sense that it could be more attractive for couples for somebody to be the breadwinner and someone to be the caretaker. So let's kind of take gender roles out of it, because between my husband and I also, or like, if anyone's going to work, it's going to be me, and he would be the stay-at-home parent. He would be the caretaker.
Because I cannot. In that point, but we'll keep talking.
Right. Also, by saying the gender roles, we're also excluding like LGBTQ plus community, which makes up for a big majority of people. And family dynamics. So, will we go back to being a one breadwinner household? Let's kind of say that, like a one breadwinner household and a caretaker, the home caretaker. Maybe that's a thing.
Not to the same about. I mean, this is what I mentioned earlier, talking about like finding a way to stop demonizing motherhood, encourage people to like focus on their kids in some capacity, but also being able to harness intellectual capital in a way while balancing those two. By saying like, we want you to be parents, we want you to be mothers, but also if you can contribute to society in some kind of project and some way.
What is society giving to you to do that? Right? What is society doing for you to succeed as a good mother? What happens if you have postpartum depression? Like, it's a real thing.
Deal with it.
Just deal with it, or have private insurance to go see a therapist. Like, but if you don't, what community outreach programs are there? What about breastfeeding moms? Like, I mean, we've demonized breastfeeding to, are there? So first of all, if there are any moms out there that are new, like listening to this, if you have clients that are like pregnant, I cannot stress this enough. Finding a mom group on social media.
Yes.
That fits you specifically, because there are some out there that are crazy. You have to, it's like dating. You have to find trial and error, right? Trial and error.
What's interesting about this, though, is that it's such a bizarre new phenomena, because historically it's like your village was like your family and your cousins and your friends, and like, so
or your neighbors.
Or your neighbors even. Yeah. You didn't need like, let me go on a Facebook group to find friends, when it's like, I just grew up and there were just people there ready to help.
Right. But
and now we kind of broke in that system in a way.
Yeah, we did break that system. The American way isn't multi-generational either.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We talk about the nuclear family. I mean, it's so interesting because when I was learning about family, they keep talking about nuclear family and cousins and uncles being a second influence. Meanwhile, in my family, my cousins were my siblings and my uncles very much were involved in my parenting, right? Like,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
it's very strange, right? So, but I, for all intents and purposes, didn't really grow up in American society because of what I was surrounded by.
Yeah.
Half and half. But right, it's you have to look for a group. You have to fit into a group, and these mom groups do as much as they can. But realistically, these are private citizens who are making the best of what has to offer, and it sucks because oftentimes, especially if you live in a cold weather area like we do, what are you doing in the winter? You're not going to go to some random person's house. That's weird, right? Your safety and all of the stranger danger. You're not going to be at the park. It's too cold for your babies. You're going to go to a coffee shop. You have to spend some money. Again, there are very few places to exist where you don't have to pay to exist. You don't have to pay to be.
Yeah.
Like, especially, it's getting worse in cities, especially.
Yeah.
I grew up on Long Island and oh my gosh, we used to go to the city all the time, right? And so I have this mentality of like, hey, you go into the city for like 10, 12 hours and you come back home and it's great. I did that recently. I was in Manhattan for 5 hours and I'm like, fuck this. I am too old for this shit. I take my kids to see the Rockettes. We usually stay at because it's cheaper, we'll stay at a hotel like near New Rochelle or Yonkers, and then take the train in. And it was so eye-opening for me because I'm like, wow, having little kids do this tourist thing is very difficult. I need a bathroom. They need a place to sit down like that isn't outside because it's cold as fuck to just exist, and that place doesn't exist. There are very few places, and I have to go out of my way to get there. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
I agree completely.
Yeah.
And, it's these things that there was a good, I forget the name of the guy, Malcolm Gladwell, I think his name is.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's an author, and he made an interesting point. It was a talk about how do you incentivize people to start investing in the next generation? And it was an idea, but it kind of does play into this point of like, he says, what if you did something like, if you invest, you pick kids you want to invest in something at a very young age, you give them you pay for their tuition, for their schooling, for their tutoring and things like that, and then you later on get a tax break based on that kid's income.
Mm-hmm.
So it's if a kid really succeeds, you end up succeeding too, because it's incentivized that you should want him to succeed, so you get a tax break later on because of the money you put into them. But this also kind of pulls into this general societal question of you'll say we need places where people can just kind of chill out. Well, then homeless people are going to show up there. Where are the homeless people coming from? Because and in all these little differences,
it's layered. It's
hard
cyclical.
for people
It's layered
to quantify exactly if we create this thing, what's our return on investment? Does everything have to be return on investment? Yeah, you do want to do things. When I say investment, I don't mean financial.
Monetary investment necessarily.
Yes, exactly. Not a monetary, but there is I'm investing in my kids, so when I get older, I'll have people to take care of me. That's a nice investment to have, something like that. But people, again, this problem with American society being that we're trying to quantify everything, and it's just too damn difficult to. And there are some things, and again, in traditional villages and societies that did things that we didn't realize what they were doing, but now they're breaking them. We're starting to see the consequences of it. And
absolutely. And I think, realistically, I am a skeptic. I think just kind of being in my line of work, I just become skeptical of everything. And so part of it is is all of this essentially to keep the 1% at the 1%? You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's an interesting point about that. That ties back to that luxury beliefs thing. And I think one thing, I suspect, and I could be wrong, that one thing capitalism did, the healthy version of it, we'll say. What it does, it's kind of like the middle point between a totalitarian society and anarchy. Because on the one hand, everybody does whatever the hell they want to do. On the other hand, you have no choice what to do. But somewhere in between, you can try it, but if you fail, it's kind of on you. But if you succeed, hey, good job, we all benefit. the one thing it does, ideally, it kind of did, and even that's kind of being affected now, is like it prevented psychopathic tyrannical figures from jumping to power too quickly.
Oh,
Because,
okay. I see. Yeah.
but the problem being that like those exact same people are now like infiltrating lobbying groups and Congress and like high-end corporations, and like those people
Yeah.
will eventually find their way to this point and try to articulate control like the one. I'm not saying all the 1% are all psychopaths, but there
No.
are people that like are really naturally gifted and good at articulating systems in place that will get them to positions of power to then start keeping the door closed behind them, like monopolies and things like that.
Yeah.
But there is
Yeah.
like there is something of a point of like it's almost like it's an evolutionary thing where like these people are just a variance in the genetic pool that they're just really good at these. So a good example of this
Well,
was
sometimes it's not
something
even
like
just that they're good at it, it's generational wealth. So they have the resource. They were born with the resources to maintain it.
yeah, and it's like can it compound forever? Can you compound generational wealth forever versus giving it
Your
back?
generational wealth is making money. The interest rate you get alone from the amount of money is enough to pay for
And the
everybody,
question is
and
like,
then
is that
reinvest in
capital
itself.
being allocated in a productive way, or is it just kind of
Nope.
being like kept in a bank account somewhere, just
Yes.
drilling on itself?
It is.
Oh,
Well, it's being hoarded, and it is being exchanged within still the top tier. It's not being trickled down.
yeah. And then the question becomes like, outside of going full blown French Revolution, how do you encourage those people
Oh
to
God.
try to start like reinvesting into society in a productive way that benefit future generations beyond just their own? But this point
Yeah.
with the village thing was, I had this with the psychopaths, with the or like the narcissists, whatever it may be. Like a good example of this was something like if traditionally speaking, like the dating scene kind of falling apart. Part of the problem with things like dating apps is that it doesn't filter out bad people the way that your family and your community did for you. So like if it's like traditionally speaking, the man has to ask the woman's father for permission to marry. Why? Because he's probably a little bit better at picking out spotting bullshit better than she might be if he's a really manipulative person.
I mean,
If he's
also
gonna come
because he has
across,
the dowry. So
what was that?
also he's in charge of the dowry. So
Dowry? What?
dowry, like
Dowry.
back in the day. Like, am I pronouncing that right?
I think I know what you're talking about, but I'll have to Google it after.
in order to like, you have to sell off your daughter. Like, your daughter comes with a dowry. Like it.
Yeah. And I think and it's not. I don't agree with it entirely, but I think there is something to the vetting process where it's like you have to get past my family and my friends and maybe like I'm a young woman, I have older brother siblings, they have to approve of you too. And if they don't, like odds are we're gonna have a hard time because maybe they can spot BS better than I can. And
sure,
that generally speaking, young girls could be considered like the prize for most guys. But that they're that someone who's like might be a little bit like narcissistic, but is also really good about putting on a facade saying like, I'm gonna work, I love you, I'm gonna work hard with you, I'm gonna take care of you, I'm gonna do this and this, I'm gonna tell you all you want to hear right now.
Love bombing.
Never talk to you again. And that they're like the structure of the family unit. Again, I don't agree with like arranged marriages in that sense of selling the daughter off, but there was like a nugget of value in there where it's like, even if we are kind of giving you away, like ideally it's to a higher quality person in some sense. Ideally.
Okay, I think I hear what you're saying. So, this is another topic I would love to talk about because this is a topic where I use this theory a lot with my clients. I think it's really helpful in terms of like dating and stuff like social exchange theory. It's my favorite. It's so funny because I say I'm not black and white, and social exchange theory is pretty black and white.
It feels like it kills the romance, though, doesn't it?
I love it. No, no, because the romance is an asset. So two parties that implement a cost-benefit analysis to determine risks and benefits. So that's obviously very sterile. So for me, social exchange theory is a way of recognizing and putting value in certain aspects of personality and what it brings to the relationship, and really looking at personality traits and behaviors as sort of assets and deficits, And are you getting out of the relationship what you're putting in? So if we're looking at the relationship in terms of investment, right? Because that's what a relationship is. A relationship is investments. So you are putting time, emotional effort. Is it a sunk cost fallacy? Are you putting in all of this time and emotional effort into a relationship that you're not getting back, but you have a hard time disconnecting from? That's a sunk cost fallacy. You know, and this theory is a lot more complicated than that, but obviously the idea is to then get somewhat of a balance. I put investment in, you put investment in, and then with our investments together, in the long term, we get back, right? We get more than what we put in, which is essentially a quality of life, happiness, long-term longevity and stuff like that. It is really helpful for a lot of my clients when they are in relationships that they are unsure of, because they are able to kind of, sometimes I will say, if it helps you to monetize it, because we live in the society we live in, we can monetize, like we can imagine things in monetary value, right? We could look at like a bottle of water. It's like, oh yeah, that's anywhere between 50 cents and $3, depending on where you are, right? So we can really easily kind of monetize things. So it's like, okay, look at their behaviors. Look at romance. Is there romance? Assign a monetary amount. How much do you want to be making a month? Is it enough? You know, what are the basic things you want in a relationship? Are you getting that? How much effort are you putting into the relationship? Is it a sunk cost fallacy? And it really helps them recognize maybe they're not in a relationship they want to be, or maybe they're not investing as much in a relationship as they think they are.
Yeah.
And I think part of the dating scene is that, you know, going back to the idea that like women don't need men anymore. And so that's because it's like, well, I don't need this person for monetary stability, for social stability. I can use something else to weigh against it. And men are having a hard time recognizing that. Just these, again, broad strokes, generally speaking, like I don't have, like, you know, I don't know how much I have. And, you know, what are men told? What, not physically, obviously, that's too obvious. That's too direct. What are some of the subliminal messages? It's like, well, my worth is from my job and my looks and my status. And women are like, yeah, okay, that's great. But what about your emotional intelligence? They're like, well, I was never told that that is where my worth is. So to me, that's worthless. And for a lot of women, it's like, no, that's actually worth a lot. Like, no. Like, I'm sorry that society led you astray.
Well,
However,
what is emotional intelligence, and why are women finding it valuable?
gosh, I think that's, you know, I don't want to speak on behalf of all women, generally speaking, but emotional intelligence, especially awareness of the emotional climate in a room. What is sad? What is happy? What is angry? And recognizing just the basics of, you are allowed to have these feelings. Oh my gosh, if I had $1, you know, the idea that like, oh, women are, you know, my girlfriend's overreacting. No, she's just reacting. She's not overreacting. She's reacting. But it makes you uncomfortable, so you will dismiss her claim very easily.
Yeah. So what's funny is actually part of this podcast intention was self-reflection on my life, on society, and things like that. But I'm also really interested in, I think I've developed an above average ability for emotional intelligence as a man from working for massage therapy. I could read people's body language and tone. And like a lot of times I see is that people will be saying things that don't match up with like their tone of voice, their behavior, their life as it is so far. And they're like, yeah, I'm totally happy, even though I'm out of a job and my wife divorced me and my kids left and my cat ran away and my house burned down. I'm happy as shit. Like, okay, so you're allowed to be honest.
You're allowed to be honest. Yeah.
You're going through some stuff right now. This is maybe the question of like, what did the village do before? And I wonder if there was a certain degree of education in emotional intelligence with men back in the day, because we had parents like kind of both in the household, that's kind of being lost in a lot of young men nowadays.
Yeah.
Just like, I don't understand. She's had feelings and women are just emotional, and like, you are too, but you don't understand what the hell's going on.
Well, right. You're absolutely right. I think there is a stigma for what men are allowed to feel and what they're not allowed to feel.
Yeah.
Right? Like men can't cry. Right? You're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to show emotion, which is bullshit, because you do show emotion, but it's emotion appropriate to what society believes meant. Like anger. Anger is a very appropriate emotion for men to show.
Yeah. That's a big one.
And it's like, okay, well, I say to my clients, because one of my clients will disagree with this, but it's okay. There's no such thing as bad emotions, just bad
Yeah.
behavior, right? Like
Yeah, I
anger
agree.
is not a problem to have. It's what you do with the anger. Like, are you punching walls? Are you throwing things? It's the behaviors, not the anger, right?
Mhm.
You can be sad. It's not the sadness that's the problem. Is what behavior is the sadness coming with? All the same. I mean, happiness is the same thing. Like there are certain behaviors that can come with happiness. Too much of a good thing is not a good thing, ever. Too much of anything is ever a good thing. So what is appropriate for men and how we I mean, I have two boys and it starts so young. It starts so young. I remember my kid, my older one, he's 7, being like 2, and I was with my family, and my family is kind of a conundrum in and of themselves because they fit a lot of molds but don't fit a lot of molds at the same time. And so he hurt his knee, and he's a little boy. He's a little baby. He's 2 years old, and he immediately starts crying, looking for mom or dad. Like, and I heard one of my uncles say, "Okay, yeah, don't stop crying. You're okay." And I'm like, "No, clearly he's not okay. He's gonna take his time. I am here. He will take his time, and when he's ready to talk to me about his feelings, he'll talk to me about his feelings." Right? Like, okay, great. And so he cries for a few minutes, and a lot, of course, the older generation is like, well, you're raising a wuss. Like, he's gonna be too sensitive. And I'm like, well, first of all, he's my child. He's already too sensitive. Also, we're not too sensitive. We're just sensitive. Like, secondly, I still have sleep anxiety from how y'all treated me. So don't be giving me like your advice too. Like, you've already fucked me up. I'm trying to undo this multi-generational family damage. And now it's to the point where, he's 7 now. If he gets hurt, he is capable of deciding what he needs in that moment.
Yeah. And I think part of it reminded me of my cousin years and years ago. I remember like he was like a house party we had for his birthday or something like that. He was like maybe like 5, 6 years old. He was outside in a scooter or skateboarding or roller skates, whatever he was, and he fell. And he was like he scratched his head and it was blood. He didn't
Yeah,
notice.
that's scary.
And he just came inside. He's like, "Hey, mom, how's it going?" And his mom's like, "Oh my god, what happened? Holy crap!" And then he started crying.
Yeah.
Because of his response, because for him it was like, "Oh, that's annoying. Okay, no big deal."
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
like the question becomes like, on the one hand, you don't want to completely dismiss it. On the other hand, you want to say like, "Okay, this happened. You okay? You feeling all right? You calm down." There's like a certain degree of emotional co-regulations going on by saying like, "How should I react to this based on people around me? Should I completely suppress it, or should I lean into 100%, or somewhere in between where it's like, this is painful, this is tough, but I'm not gonna die. I can learn to deal with this. I gotta just like." Sit it, let it pass through my system, and then relax.
I do agree. Like, kids are fascinating to me, but with the kids, I actually don't like kids, so I think that's really interesting. I think they're fascinating. I just don't like them.
Except my kids. I love my kids, but everyone else.
I love my children. I do. I love my kids, but sometimes I don't like them. I'm going to be honest about that. But I love them all the time. I like them the majority of the time. With my kids, if Benjamin gets upset or like he gets stressed out about something, now we do, when he was younger, and Theodore a little bit now, it's like, okay, we're going to breathe together, like in for 5, out for, and we do it together. Like he mimics me. And then after we do a few amounts of breaths, like, okay, now what is happening? Talk to me. How are you feeling? And like I said, now he's very emotionally mature, even for his age. I mean, I think that's just a product of also having a counselor for a mom and always talking about feelings. But he, from a very young age, will be like, I'm frustrated, or I'm angry, or this makes me annoyed, or like, what have you. He's not an angel. I love my children. They are not angels. They are angels in my eyes, but they are figuring out life, and life is hard. And so there will be tantrums and there will be attitudes. And I remember when I was younger, I was not allowed to be angry. I was supposed to be grateful, right? Like, you're supposed to be grateful for what you have, which is so hard because my existence is only X amount of years. I don't have my family's memory ingrained in me, right? Yeah. Gratefulness is taught, not observed. So he's frustrated about something. He's angry about something. I wasn't allowed to feel angry. He feels angry. Maybe it's a new rule. I actually just implemented a new rule. So this is like a perfect example where We're not allowed to eat in the living room anymore, see, because they make a mess. And they
Cool.
can't be responsible. Like, and I hate cleaning. So it's like, nope, we're not allowed to eat in the living room. You have to eat in the dining room or in the kitchen, like one or
Yeah.
the other. And they hated that. Oh my God. I was like the dictator that or like down with the dictator. I hate this. And so my son is like, I'm very angry at you. And I'm like, that is understandable. He's like, I don't think this is fair. Like, great. I appreciate how you feel about this. And he started kind of back talking. He's like, well, I don't even remember what he said. Like, but he started back talking. I was like, hang on. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to think that my rule is not fair. You are not allowed to mistreat me for it. Like that is where I draw the line. Because now you're being mean, and that's not okay. Like, I understand you don't like the rule. Okay. But what you're not going to do is you're not going to say mean things to me. Also, that hurts me. So, and he's like, okay, he took a step and he's like, okay. Because, and I'll say, when mommy and daddy are upset, we don't hurt your feelings. This is not something that should be done. You wouldn't want someone to hurt your feelings. Let's not hurt other people's feelings. Like, you can go to your room. You can throw some stuffed animals around. That is safe. Do not throw anything hard. You can scream into your bed. You can mope for however you need to mope. And he did. He's like, all right, I'm going to go to my room and I'm going to sulk, essentially. And I'm like, great, I'll see you in an hour. And that's just what happened, and it's amazing when you let tantrums just kind of happen. They will resolve themselves a lot quicker. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a major problem we see in American society, and I'm not sure what it's like in other societies, but it's just like people are becoming so increasingly disconnected from their emotions because they're trying to suppress it or act like they don't exist. And it just creates this massive backlog in your brain of things that you haven't dealt with before. And you're wondering why people are going crazy and shooting people and committing suicide left and right.
Right.
And the point of it being that, like, you need to give it space to let the emotions run through you, but not control you. Because if you don't give it that space, they will start puppeteering you in ways you don't even realize.
Oh, no. Yeah. And I mean, there's no better reflection to see all the things you hate about yourself than having kids, because they will reflect that back. You're like, wow, I hate this about myself, and now I see it in my kids. I guess I have to do some self-work now. Goddamn. But that's just a circle of life, but going back to this village thing, again, this is happening in such a small environment, whereas what does emotions and what do, oftentimes in child therapy, a kid might have depression or anxiety and it presents itself as anger. Like, anger is it's just a raw emotion, right? And so when kids get confused, they get angry. When adults get confused, they get angry. For sure. And so, this idea of this community is, if this were to happen, and so this happens in a supermarket, right? Kid tantrums in a supermarket. What happens? Parents gets embarrassed. So one of two things happen, or not one of two things. One of the things that could happen is, all right, I'm just taking my kid and I'm leaving the cart. And I've heard people say this, I'm going to leave the cart. I'm just taking the kid out of the grocery store. And it's like, okay, but what has that taught them?
So it's really funny you mentioned that. Is I was talking to somebody recently about this idea of like societal productivity creep, and the idea that we're trying to squeeze every drop of productivity out of every person by pulling from other areas of their lives that are doing things that we don't realize were actually beneficial in the first place. And the initial example I came up with was like food shopping, because now it's like with food shopping, you could literally just do Instacart. You can press a button online, all of a sudden the food is ready in a bag. You show up, they drop it in your trunk of your car, you drive off.
Yeah,
which is saving time.
I'm guilty of this.
But what are you giving up in exchange? So if you shop locally, maybe like, all right, you get the chance to like go food shopping, which in itself can kind of slow you down. Time you should kind of relax a little bit. Ideally, you might bump into somebody locally, so you have a conversation, an unexpected conversation with somebody you want to care about. If you have little kids, the kids get opportunities to practice how to behave in public, because they might need repetition of their own temper tantrums control. All of that is wiped out in the form of just like click a button, food's ready to go. And then you wonder why when they go out into public, the kids are complete psychopaths because they had no practice.
Yeah.
You can go to a restaurant and you see the kids on iPads nowadays. It's like, no, you need to like give them the opportunity to try to keep their shit together when they blow up. And you put them in the car, you give them a timeout. But it's like they need to physically practice how to control their emotions.
My I will say my kids are not tablet kids. They do have tablets, but we have restrictions on them, thank goodness. I get it. Like, I get it. why some people bring their kids and tablets into a restaurant, because like sometimes I just want a meal. Sometimes I just want a meal, and I want these kids to shut up. I just want to eat. I just want to eat, and I get it. Those kids really are with you all the live long day, you know. However, you are absolutely right. You are like everything in moderation, right? Like I think that's the say. You take your kid to a restaurant and they have a tablet every time. They're losing out on the social structure of what it means to go have a meal with somebody. They're losing out on the opportunity. However, you also cannot expect a child's attention span to fit an adult agenda. And I think 9 out of 10 times.
Like they said, the extremes, absolutely. It's like you
Right,
need to give
I
them
think-
opportunities too. Yeah.
I think 9 out of 10 times that's where like adults get frustrated though. It's like we want our children to navigate the world like they're adults. They're not adults. Like they can't, like, so grocery shopping. I mean, think about, you know, oh gosh, I remember talking to clients about this with teenagers. You know, they're like, you know, all they do is shut up there in their room, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, because you own the rest of the house. You do recognize that, right? Like the living room is yours. The den is yours. Your bedroom is yours. The only room they have is theirs. And then the parents will be like, well, no, the living room is a shared space. I'm like, oh, is it? Who designed the living room? Who came up with the decor? Who is buying the furniture? That is your, like, no, you can't tell me other. That is your room. It's your room. Like, I'm sorry. So the kids only feel comfortable in their own rooms. It's the only place that they can express themselves. Very similarly to this grocery shopping thing, right? Like we are expecting children to act like adults. When I go grocery shopping and I want something, I see something and I'm like, I want that. I'm going to buy it. I'm not going to deny myself it, right? Whether it's like, oh, there's this exotic fruit that just in limited production, I'm going to go put it in my cart, right? Or bag of chips. Oh my gosh, I love this limited edition cereal. I'm going to grab it. Coffee, love coffee. Oh, there's this $20 coffee from Ethiopia from some exotic rainforest. Yes, give it to me. I want it. But we say no to children.
Yeah.
If kid is like, I want this, and we're like, no. And that, you know, so I'm not making that argument in the sense of, so you should buy your kid something, you should do this. It's just understanding that there's a reason why this kid is tantruming, because they see you getting whatever you want and they're like, well, why not me? Now I'm angry.
Yeah.
Now I'm angry. And it's hard to explain to a kid. It's like, well, you know, it's my money and I'm not, this is not sugar nonsense. Right. But you can't do that. And then so you immediately tell them to just shut up. Just stop.
I think historically too, it was really interesting. I was talking to somebody about like, I think in more not super ultra orthodox Jewish communities, but like somewhat similar, like they're kind of a couple notches down. Is that in that community? And also, I have a patient who I'm hoping to bring on the podcast eventually. It's like he's Middle Eastern. I don't know exactly where he's from, but we talk in detail about his family and his structure. And I asked him like when he first came in, and like, when you have a wedding, how many people show up to the wedding? And he's like, at minimum, like 800.
Yeah.
Like a crazy amount. But I started asking him, like, well, how does your family deal with this and this and this and this? And he basically made a point to say, like, how in the family structure, like, when a kid hits, like, you know, like 11, 12, 13 years old, they start to kind of get a dabble of what it's like to be an adult by interacting with certain. They're like, we're gonna have a family meeting. You're not going to contribute, but you're going to sit here and watch and see how we interact. And then maybe little years later, we're going to assign you a task to do something. So it's just kind of like gradually drip feeding them into becoming adults.
Well,
but
they also have a sense of community in their cousins, right? Like in their cousin, like they have a group. I remember with my family family's not that big. But we had a lot of independence when it came to like the kids just hanging out, like in a house. All right, so there's 4 of us, and we're just in another room dicking around. And there was a video of you know, an old family video of this happening, and it's like that would never happen today. I would never let my kids do that today. And I don't know what that says about me, but we were, oh my gosh, I think I was 4, Dan was 3, as is whatever 7, and Alex is probably 4, 8 and 9, right? So, you know, a pretty big gap.
Yeah.
And we were playing on old workout machinery. It was just like the adults were in one room hanging out and we were in another room. It must have been someone's recreation room, and there was just like these, like, you know, Bowflex old 80s 90s machines, right? And it's like there's weights and like one of us is like just pulling the cord, like sitting on the bench, like just pulling the cord up and down. We're like jumping all over. I'm like, I would never. Oh my God, the amount of anxiety that would give me today. But there is, to be fair to, I mean, not to be fair, like watch your kids, guys, watch your kids. But there is a level of independence that comes with that. Now, could that still exist in a different format? Absolutely. Absolutely. But times change
what do
and
you
things
mean
change.
for independence?
Oh God. So I think nowadays parenting is a lot more hands-on. I know there's pros and cons on the gentle parenting, just to be more aware. Like, there's just more awareness. Like, would I let my kids play on old machinery now? Absolutely not. Would I let their friends do it? Absolutely not. Their play is going to be a lot more monitored. And does that make me a helicopter mom? Like, I don't like to think so. Maybe it does. Maybe it does. Whereas when I was younger, in terms of that, I had more privacy. We could just kind of play however we wanted to play, which lends itself to other problems. I think everything lends itself to pros and cons at the end of the day, but in this situation, so it lends itself to a lot more privacy, a lot more connection, one-on-one, emotional connection to your siblings, to your cousins, to your friends, because you're sharing that intimacy. Whereas now, even if I have a friend here who has their two kids are like, they're practically cousins, because this friend is like a sister to me. We see each other all the time. Their kids are I've picked up their kids from school. Like, it's, we're very much a family unit. And I don't let if their kids come over, it's like, no, you can't go off into another room and play. Like, that's not okay. Like, you're not, in my mind, you're not old enough yet. Come back. I don't trust what's happening until I'm aware of that. But also, I then give up my autonomy. I can't just go dick around while my kids preoccupy themselves. You know what I mean? Whereas, obviously, in this family video, the adults are just chilling. The adults are having a great, grand old time, and no one's watching the kids.
Yeah.
So that's what you give up, right?
Well, there's a book I read. It's called How to Raise a Healthy Gamer.
Oh God.
And I basically explained my entire childhood of like why I got addicted to video games and why I had to break that addiction. But one thing he talks about in particular, and it's not even just about gaming, it's also about like kids in general, is like, you mentioned a second ago, it's like this living room is not theirs, it's yours.
Yeah.
It's not exactly like, well, like, hey, 5-year-old, what would you like to do with the decor? Like, it's not gonna be like that.
Right.
But creating a space where it's like, I want you to bring your toys in here and play amongst us. So you'll have your little corner, it's like your toy corner or whatever it is. When your friends come over, because one thing they talk about in the book as far as like addiction and gaming goes is that you basically want to create a space where it's like, if you're going to play games, it's going to be in the living room on the TV with the speakers blaring so we can all hear what you're saying to your friend.
Yeah.
Because like, I want you to like not be poisoned by strangers on the internet telling you the N-word over and over again.
Absolutely.
But also B, it's like, so play and socialize with people around you and learn how to socially connect. And maybe like I'm playing a game.
Play.
Yeah, and then maybe like, like maybe I'm the one doing the dishes or something like that. And then like you're the kid's in the living room and all of a sudden he's like, oh my God, Dad, I just got a 10 kill streak in Call of Duty. I'm like, good job. Hell yeah, keep it up, bro.
Yeah.
But it's like it's this communal sense, this village where it's
sense.
like, I'm proud of you and also keeping an eye on you. And you're also aware that I'm nearby, whereas you can't hyper isolate, even in the case of the bedrooms and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think it's a relatively, I'm suspecting, a new phenomena where it's like the kids sleep by themselves in a separate space in the house.
Yeah, co-sleeping.
Whereas historically, it's like we all kind of slept in the same room, and there was a certain sense of like even when I was growing up, I had my own bedroom, and I was terrified to go to sleep because whether it was under the bed or in the closet or in the
my argument to that is like we don't expect, so in a traditional household, mom and dad, right, like, or like mom and mom, or like two adults in a traditional house, it's like you don't expect them to sleep apart. Why are we expecting the children to sleep apart? And do you know how many like, I'm guilty of this too, how many adults are like, oh, I have a hard time sleeping if my partner's not in the room, but we make our kids do it. Like, you make your so I have a lot of it. My and I will say my children don't sleep in our room, but we don't kick them out. Like, it's an open door policy. They are free to come and go. You know what I mean? The pain in the ass, but so is parenting. Parenting's a pain in the ass. Like, shit, it takes up a lot of your time. But these are the sacrifices you make. But you're absolutely right. This idea of like cohabitating, co-communicating. You're right. Like a 5-year-old isn't going to choose the decor, right? Well, actually, hang on. It says right now my living room is decorated very strangely because my 7-year-old made an elaborate tent, and I was like, I will give you the grace of having this up for 3 days. But even I'm still saying after 3 days, this has to come down. We have to put this away because this is going to drive me nuts.
Yeah.
But think about like the 80s and the 90s. Like there's a TV in the living room, right? It's like, I remember the TV always belonged to the oldest person in the house. Like whoever was oldest in the house got say for the television. And so again, if we're looking at that space, like, yeah, we typically don't have TVs in our bedrooms, for the most part. And so, or back in the day. And so the TV was controlled by mom or dad. Again, think about how much of the environment these adults are controlling and how little of the environment the child gets to control. Like the living room, again, the decor, how the furniture is. All kids want to do is hop up and down the furniture. I mean, it's fun. It's like a jungle gym indoors, right? Coffee tables get in their way. They just want to move everything aside, and what are the adults going to say? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, some people's living rooms aren't even used.
Yeah,
Like,
it's more about the
it's just,
status of like when other people come over and say, "Oh, wow, this is what I always
a
find funny."
sitting room. This is where we can come sit. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it funny when like I walk into somebody's house and they have kids and it's a disaster and like, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, this is probably good. You're living here. You're not just like, when I walk in and it's absolutely pristine and nothing's out of place, and it's like, you have no fun here. Nothing happens here.
You have nothing but this is where fun comes to die.
If you have no kids, okay, I understand. But if you have kids and it's not a little bit chaotic, it's like, then you're not really letting them like grow up. You're not like part of that benefit is in them like doing some crazy shit once in a while and being a little exploratory and trying this and that. And when it's like, no, we won't jump on the couch. We don't do this. We keep everything super organized and pristine at all times. And it's just like, you wonder why this kid hates you later on in life.
Yeah. Or like why they want to just like go into their bedroom, it's just interesting, so I don't want to say like we let our kids go feral. I mean, sometimes we do, I guess, but
that's a good terminology.
Yeah, we don't let our kids jump on the couch because I have an irrational fear of a spring like slashing their legs open. I don't know. Weird irrational fears unlocked. But you want to climb over it, great. You want to take all the cushions out to make a fort free. No one has say over the TV. So if someone is watching TV, I just have as a woman like, oh my God, I have to go pick up my kid. No, it's his grandmother's day to pick him up. It's okay. Oh God, no. So no one is in charge of. Your battery.
I gotta figure this. This actually happened yesterday too, but the timing actually worked out perfectly because I do actually have to get going. But at least I know. So I'm curious, who is in your village?
So my husband, obviously, his parents, they recently moved up to be closer to us. I have some feelings about that. Mostly positive, sometimes complicated.
Hope they don't watch this episode, I guess.
They know. They're aware. My mother-in-law, at the very least, knows. I do love them dearly. I do. Coming from someone who is now an orphaned adult, it's honestly so lovely to have them. And I have a mom group. My best friend who lives up here is Megan, and she has 2 kids who are basically my nieces and my nephews. And my kids, her kids call me Auntie Stephanie, and my kids call her Auntie Megan. And we have a mom group that meets every Thursday. It's a book club, but it's not a book club. And we just every Thursday, the 4 of us get together and just like laugh and eat cheese and wine and just bitch or talk or watch Twilight or something stupid, But we indulge in ourselves. It is. It's a form of community. It's a sense of community. And we were 4 women who previously did not have, we're missing that in life. And now we have each other, and it's very helpful. We do read a lot of the same books, and that's kind of how we started our friendship. I think that's why we literally call ourselves not a book club.
Yes, I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. We have sweaters that say not a book club.
That's good.
So that's my community. I have my extended family, but they live 6 hours away. So, I'm the only one in my family who lives in this area. So it's very much who is in my vicinity, who is, and I have another friend, Renee, who keeps me, grounded a lot of the time, and she's very, very like, if I had to like sum it up in a nutshell. So yeah, I am fortunate that I found that group of women. I'm so fortunate that I have Megan, and her husband is amazing, and her children are wonderful. And we do rely on each other a lot, and that's lovely.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful village.
It is my little village. But
Thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime.
Thank you for joining us today. If you found us informative, thought-provoking, or learned something new, please leave a review or a comment and tell a friend about the podcast. Feedback means the world to me, as I want to make this the best possible podcast that it can be, and to help others identify the causes of and solutions to problems in their own lives and villages. Until next time, let's keep working on rebuilding the village.